He's not contradicting himself. He's just changing his answer. Because he's God, he's allowed to do that. He's not changing his mind. He's just changing his answer.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's really interesting.
Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible.
Today is day 236, covering Jeremiah 42, 43, 44, and 45.
Well. Yeah, cool. Let's do it then, shall we? Jeremiah 42, verse 7. So I've mentioned verse 7, but it's kind of the bits leading up to it as well, because it is this whole section where some bloke is chatting to Jeremiah and saying, hey, what should we do? Whatever you tell us, we'll do. Consult God. And he's like, all right. And then it's 10 days later, this is the verse 7 part, 10 days later, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. And the thing I got from that is just, and we've kind of touched on it before, but it's God's answers aren't always going to be immediate. And I think what the specific part that sort of jumps out to me at that stage is how frequently we're praying for something, but then when we don't hear anything within the first day, week, month, year, decade, we just stop praying. But right. Actually, there are so many times, and it's something which our pastor actually 2 weeks ago was saying about, you could just be one prayer away. And I think I might have mentioned it last week at some point.
You did, yeah.
But it's just another example of that, really. And then it's funny because, I don't know, do you have anything before my next point? No, not really.
No.
Because then in 42:10, the response from Jeremiah from God is, if you stay in this land, I will build you up and I won't tear you down. And then they end up not doing that, bad things happen. And what's really interesting is that previously when Hezekiah, I think it's Zedekiah was consulting Jeremiah on what to do, the response was, if you leave and submit to the Babylonians and go, you will be saved. And for this fella, who I really should find out the name, all the army officers, basically, by the looks of it. But when they asked, the response was, you need to leave. You need to stay, and I will build you up and I won't tear you down. So the answers were different for different people. And so it's not that God ever changes his mind, but sometimes God can change his answer. And it's different answers for different people at times. The same question can be asked by two different people and have two completely different answers. We can't just assume one for the other, and we can't assume that just because God said something once, he won't say something contradictory in the future. He's not contradicting himself. He's just changing his answer. Because he's God, he's allowed to do that. He's not changing his mind. He's just changing his answer.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's really interesting, that whole thing. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of an interesting thought as well, just the idea of what you said at the beginning, answers not being immediate, and just keep persisting in prayers. Jesus tells us to pray with impunity. And I love that word. And you mentioned before the idea of you might have been, what was it? It was something like on a field digging for oil or something, and he was like an inch away or whatever. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. That's it, digging for diamonds, and he was so close. So yeah, just don't give up. And just know that just because one person gets their prayer answered in one way and whatever doesn't mean that's going to be what happens to you. Yeah, absolutely. Very important stuff. 42 verse 18. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. As my anger and wrath have been poured out on those who lived in Jerusalem, so will my wrath be poured out on you when you go to Egypt. You will be a curse and an object of horror, a curse and object of reproach. You will never see this place again. So after the remnant were obedient to come out of the city, now they must stay obedient to God and do his will to rebuild. So just remember that you can be obedient in one season to God and do the right thing, but it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? So you have to continue to be obedient, continue to walk that line, continue to do your best. You can't just do that for one season and be like, yep, I was obedient to God, check that box. It's like, no, you got to continue that for your whole life. And the good news is,
dude, I like that.
As new people under the new covenant, the good news is we also have the Holy Spirit to help us and to work within us, which is something obviously that they didn't have at this point.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. I'm actually going to make a similar point from a different verse on a different, it's going to be cool in the next day or two, I think it is.
Nice. Love that. You might as well crack on, mate. You're next on the 43, I think.
Sure. So then in 43, Jeremiah finished telling these guys what to do and stuff. And after having initially in the beginning of chapter 42, so whatever you tell us, we'll do it. We trust you. We trust God. Jeremiah's like, all right, do this. They're like, no, you're lying to us. You're saying this so the Babylonians will get us.
Yeah.
It's just, I think what I got out of that is they said that they were going to trust Jeremiah and trust God. But when push came to shove, they didn't. And I think, well, what I wrote down basically is trust is less about the words, more about the actions. And in a similar way, that's something which we say to our kids a lot. Is like, I don't want an answer, I want an action.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, can you go and wash your hands? You get an answer. So I don't want an answer, I want an action, mate. Go and wash your hands. Yeah. Stuff like that. And I think this is a similar type vibe where, you know, you say you'll do it, but actually the proof's in the pudding, for the sake of a nice English saying.
Yeah, nice. And that's good. So I had a feeling, I liked your first point, but I was like, no, I think he's got more coming. Could have done it. That's good. That's better. But anyways, love that, mate. And you're so right, because, you know, people will often say in principle they'll do something, and then, as you say, they won't follow through with it. It's really easy to tell someone yes, you know, just to appease them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, absolutely. That's just like human nature at its worst sometimes.
On that, we've had both mentioned that before, the whole saying yes and not follow it through, being in sales, as we've both been at different times. It's so annoying, isn't it? And we've mentioned that exact point before. Very
frustrating. So then I'm on to 43 verse 13. There in the temple of the sun in Egypt, he will demolish the sacred pillars and will burn down the temples of the gods of Egypt. So this reminded me of when we did Sharpen Your Sword with Nathan, and the fact that the plagues were actually all undermining some of the gods of Egypt.
Yeah.
And so again, God is coming in and he's undermining all of these mythical gods that the Egyptians worship. So it's the same sort of thing. Like when God turns up, all the idols fall down, right? Because he, in like just one swift of his hand, can just prove that he's the real deal.
Yeah.
And everything they've been worshipping is a lie. And I like to see that here. It's cool.
Very true. I like it, man. I feel like I've been chatting a lot. We have a similar point next, so why don't you crack on and I'll see what I pull out of it as well.
Sounds good. Just full disclosure, I don't know what time we're on at the moment either, because my stopwatch died.
Literally 2 minutes, mate. Well, a couple of minutes, I think.
All right, so for Jeremiah 44 verse 19, the women added, when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, did not our husbands know that we were making cakes impressed with her image and pouring out drink offerings to her? And this whole section, I think the bit that you pointed out really here adds, it's just really sad to think that they think some other God is helping them. It's superstition, it's wishful thinking, obviously. Yeah. And what we have to remember is sometimes seasons with God, the real God, are tough. But that's usually because we're supposed to learn things. We've talked about being refined in silver before.
Yeah.
Yesterday, you know, I do some counseling every now and then about my marriage, about my life, things like that. And one of the things that my counselor said, she's a Christian counselor, is that often marriage isn't necessarily, and life, not just marriage, but life and marriage, are not necessarily meant to make you happy. They're meant to make you holy, right? And so in this instance, it's the same thing. They're seeking after a God, in inverted commas, that will make them happy, but they're not seeking the real God, the truth that will make them holy. And God doesn't want fair weather fans.
That's good. All of that is good, man. Yeah, it's very similar to the point that I was making out the back of that. And it's like, they basically said, when we worship you, we had nothing. When we worship the Queen of Heaven, we had all this good stuff. And it's like, God will often allow success in spite of idolatry. And it's very easy to be deceived by where your success comes from. Like, it's easy to attribute your success to your own hard work, which, don't get me wrong, hard work pays the bills. But it's actually all God, you know, left, right, and center.
Yep.
It's just...
I'd go as far just quickly to say sometimes your prosperity can actually be a punishment from God in some ways. It's like, oh yeah, you're not going to believe in me. All right, you go off your own path.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I.e., well, tomorrow, Jezza 46, 47, 48, please read it.
In the meantime, please consider joining us on social media at 2 Brits and a Bible and sharing this with someone to help spread the word of God.